give direction, Lord. Cause that our contributions, Father, are made according to your honor and to your glory. Bless this parliament today, we pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. Now let us say together the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. And now may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all now and forevermore. Amen.
The Senate is now in session.
Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General. Announcements by Your Honor the President.
We have heard from Senator Monique Tate to the effect that she will join us later. We have minutes relating to 8 earlier sittings of the Senate. Minutes of Wednesday, March the 11th, 2020, Monday, March the 23rd, 2020, Friday, March the 27th, 2020, Wednesday, April the 1st, 2020, Monday, April the 27th, 2020, Wednesday, June 10th, 2020, Wednesday, June 12th, 2020, and Wednesday, June the 24th, 2020. We have a motion that they be.
President, I beg that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed.
The question is that the minutes for the dates earlier mentioned be confirmed as read. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. And the minutes for the dates indicated are now confirmed.
Presentation of petitions. Presentation of papers.
Mr. President, I beg to lay the report of the Barbados General Election 2018.
Reports from select committees. Questions to ministers. request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate, moved by Minister.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Standing Order 45-2 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting to allow us to complete our work.
The question is that Standing Order 45-2 be suspended for the balance of today's sittings. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methink the ayes have it. And Standing Order 45-2 is now being suspended.
Introduction of bills.
Mr. President, I beg to move the first reading of the Utilities Regulation Amendment Bill 2020, to move the first reading of the Police Amendment Bill, let me come back. To move the first reading of the Police Amendment Bill 2020, to move the first reading of the Fair Trading Commission Amendment Bill 2020, and to move the first reading of the Supreme Court Judicature Amendment Bill 2020.
The question is that the aforementioned bills be now read the first time. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methink the ayes have it.
Public business.
Public business is now the order of the day.
Order number 2, sir. In the name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Fair Trading Commission Amendment Bill 2020.
Mr. President, before I lead off debate on this bill, I'm seeking this chamber's permission and certainly your permission for it to be dealt in terms of a cognate debate. Item number 3, the Utilities Regulation Amendment Bill, is inextricably linked to item number 2, the Fair Trading Commission Amendment Bill. And in these circumstances, I'm seeking the Chairman's permission to do this as a cognate debate.
The question is that the Fair Trading Commission Act, Chapter 326, and the Utilities Regulation Act, Chapter 282, be debated together as related matters. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methink the ayes have it. Mr. Leader, I think we can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, this matter, I believe, is one in which I expect that we should have some matter of consensus in this honourable chamber today, recognizing the importance to a small island development state as ours, faced with the ravages of climate change and a concomitant link to the use of fossil fuels. I think it is knowledge to all Barbadians, I believe by now, that there is and there has been for some years now a trust in terms of energy generation in this country towards renewable energy, recognizing the importance of preservation and enhancing our energy security in terms of fossil fuels and their availability and the volatility in terms of the prices of these fuels, and of course the foreign exchange outflows that occur in terms of purchasing fossil fuel. The need for us in terms of sustainability to have a diverse energy mix, and of course, as demonstrated, I believe it was the last October, with the outage of the Barbados Light and Power, the need for us to, in terms of providing for our energy sector, not more or less to be putting all of our eggs in one basket at this point in time. The process is guided by the Barbados Energy Policy, Barbados National Energy Policy 2019 to 2030, which stands out and expounds that there's a goal of becoming 100% renewable energy and carbon neutral over by 2030. Some would say that this is indeed a high aspiration. But I believe in terms of Barbados, a country that has been accused of punching above its weight over time, that this is something that we as all Barbadians was truly try to work towards in terms of achieving. Indeed, we led the Western Hemisphere in terms of the use of solar power back in the 1970s when we more or less introduced the whole concept of solar heaters to this region. And so when it comes to the whole aspects of renewable energy, Barbados is somewhat a leader. And I'm not saying uniquely we are in terms of the region, in terms of moving towards that. So we see the whole process of looking at renewable energy, be it solar energy, be it wind, be it biogas, be it biomass, is something that we are all engaged in and looking towards. The whole process of renewable energy has been more or less stagnant over the last few years because of a certain uncertainty in terms of the pricing, the rates to be paid. And the whole purpose of us being here today is to bring to put the policy, the legislation, and the regulatory framework in alignment more or less. And the process has not been an easy one, and it's not been a short one in terms of negotiations involving several different stakeholders, the Barbados, the Ministry of Energy and Water Resources, the Fair Trading Commission, BLNP, the Government Electrical Engineering Department, and other stakeholders have been involved in this process. Indeed, there's also been public consultation in going forward. And out of this, of course, recognizing the importance of the Fair Trading Commission. Out of this have come, I believe it was last September, the whole concept of the feed-in tariff and the utilization of that tariff in terms of for persons who are private producers and persons in other aspects of the renewable energy business. Mr. President, prior to for several decades in terms of Barbados, and certainly in terms of when the FTC was established, in terms of the electricity, it was felt they just dealt essentially with Barbados Light and Power and the consumer. There was no contemplation for third-party participation as it's occurring now in terms of renewable energy. And so obviously we've had to make some changes. I believe it was back in 2009 when the concept of the renewable energy rider was introduced on a pilot basis, and where persons who were small customers selling electricity to the grid then would receive 31 cents per kilowatt hour. And this was created for the small players and was matched against the fuels charge. And that was thought over time to be unstable and too volatile and too variable. And in 2016, it was finally deemed that this was inappropriate. And the whole process, which I described earlier in terms of the consultations to look at this entire process, they started that, obviously recognizing that the rate setting at that point in time and the fees were certainly inadequate and not very efficient. It's felt that now with the proposed stable pricing system, with the feed-in tariffs, that certainly would attract more entrepreneurs and certainly more investors, and certainly encourage banks to free up in terms of their credit. I believe there's some persons in here who've expressed a desire already in terms of having investment in the renewable energy sector. I see at least one honorable member who has invested in this regard. As I mentioned earlier, there are a number of categories in terms of renewable energy systems, and there are 5 tariff categories which have been established for solar, 2 for wind, 1 for biogas, and 1 for biomass. And just by example, a solar system, that is a photovoltaic system, up to 10 kilowatts in size will earn about 42 cents per kilowatt hour. And as it increases, obviously the earnings increase. In terms of the biomass and the biogas, obviously this has an additional component in terms of the environmental protection and obviously the cost earned is higher, slightly higher than that in terms of the photovoltaic system. As I said, this is to expand the whole process. We have large producers in terms of renewable energy, and this provides an opportunity for those small generators, so independent power producers, to also benefit and to get reimbursement on their investment, which is commendable, and it is part of the process, of government's process, in terms of allowing, and I spoke about this some weeks ago in these chambers, in opening and allowing the ordinary Barbadians to invest and to be involved in projects. And this allows, for example, Mr. President, persons who might not be able to afford to install photovoltaic system, but by way of co-ops to perhaps rent space, land space, roof space, to be part of the process, even though they might not have the capacity to actually set up and install their own individual system. And for all of this, the tariff applies. As I said early on, in terms of the third-party involvement, this now levels the playing field for that participation of those small individuals in terms of renewable energy and in terms of the entire process. The co-op is interesting. It speaks to a group of persons perhaps in a specific district, pooling their resources in terms of photovoltaics and being able to connect to the grid and have a sort of co-op system. And I believe as I was driving here this morning, I actually heard it being discussed on brass tacks, the need for persons to pay more attention to this renewable energy co-op. And I thought that was quite interesting, bearing in mind what we were coming in terms of to discuss today. I'm not going to go into all of the technical details, Mr. President. I won't delay this honorable chamber with all of the technical aspects of it. Suffice it to say that in terms of this Fair Trading Commission, it would allow the Fair Trading Commission to now have extend its functions to include renewable energy, which was not the case initially. And as I said, to be involved in the whole aspect of tariffs and setting of rates, and indeed in terms to some extent in terms of the regulation of the tariffs. There are also issues in terms of interconnection agreements, which will come later on. Those are to be worked out in terms of the details, recognizing that it has to do with connections to the grid. And this is not really the remit of the Fair Trading Commission. And certainly they will need the expertise of the Government Electrical Engineering Department. But this is a process which will have to continue. And I believe they're trying to finalize the terms of the interconnection. And this is a matter that will certainly come at a later date. I know that my colleague on the other side is excited about this, but it is not something that will be forgotten. It is something that is, in fact, a work in progress, the whole aspect of the interconnection agreement. As I said, these amendments are seeking to equip the FCC with the legal authority to carry out its regulatory remit over the electricity sector. They will be involved in as the price and rate setting, the sole authority, and it is absolutely necessary at this point in time. As I said, Mr. President, I believe that it is very important, these amendments, they're vitally important at this point in time if we were to proceed in terms of proceeding towards our goal in 2030 of 100% renewable energy generation, recognizing that in Barbados we utilize probably about 9,000 to 10,000 barrels of oil yearly in terms of electricity and power generation, 50% for electricity, about 35% in terms of transportation. And I believe that these measures will certainly go a long way in reducing the necessity for us to import such large quantities of fossil fuels, and it certainly will be down to the benefit of Barbadians in terms of preservation of the environment, in terms of energy sustainability, in terms of investment and the opportunities for small, ordinary Barbadians to participate in this process. With these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a second time.
I recognize Senator Drake, the first speaker.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning to the chamber. Sir, the two amendments that are before us are essentially a continuation of government's ambition as we move closer to 2030 to turn the island into a country that's 100% run by renewable energy, or at least be carbon neutral by then. Sir, last year we amended the Barbados Light and Power Act to make provisions for the inclusion of renewable energy. And now, today, based on the amendments before us in the Utilities Regulation Amendment and the Fair Trading Commission amendment bills, so that the FTC has the proper regulatory framework to regulate the transition of Barbados to renewable energy. And to the government's credit, they have since come into office, put a number of things in motion as it relates to the energy sector. I can stand here on the other side and admit that one area that there seems to be movement afoot has been the energy sector. We've had the Barbados National Energy Policy revised, so we now have a 2019 to 2030 strategy that was completed. We also, as the leader of government business noted, the feed-in tariff rates being introduced last October, outlining the categories of renewable energy and their various capacity allocations. That capacity allocation, Mr. President, when the FTC announced it, was 32.7 megawatts of power. And surprisingly enough, 1 week later, we had the Prime Minister, in all of her ambitions, state that we needed to increase that by at least 100 megawatts of power, Mr. President, in order to meet the 2030 agenda. Sir, we have been somewhat stuck, I would say, in relation to the movement of installing capacity for a very long time. And I believe when I listened to the debate in the other place by the Minister of Small Business, he's noted that we now have 54 megawatts of installed capacity, both practically installed and licensed as well. And now we're hearing that the rates are being negotiated for systems between 1 megawatt and 5 megawatts, and a maximum rate as well for those over 5 megawatts. And so this actually has to be done in a manner with urgency, because based on the national energy policy, we only have 3 years to reach a target of 52% of our energy being produced by renewables. And sir, at present, less than 10%, because I know the numbers are now varying, but it is less than 10% still of energy is sourced from renewable energy. So therefore, we have to move very aggressively if we are to meet the intended target in 2023. Sir, in fairness, what government is really trying to do with these targets, they're trying to do something in 9 years. That is something that is really done over a very long time horizon, usually 15, 20, 25 years even. And in doing this transition in such a short time period, it means there are a number of things that we have to take into consideration. There are a lot of things that will have to change very quickly in order to meet these targets. The first one, and the leader of government business mentioned it just now, coming on to the end of his speech, was the grid design. That is going to be one of the major things that we'll have to change. At the moment, traditionally, we've had central utility pumping electricity out to consumers who then utilize that energy. There is no storage capacity or anything like that. And now we're trying to introduce IPPs and other producers onto the grid. So that means you have these subsidiary players producing energy to the grid. And then where does that energy go? How does the consumer consume that energy? Is it from the main utility? Will it be from the IPPs? All of these things have to be worked out in order to ensure that we have grid stability, because Barbadians have become accustomed to a reliable service, unlike water in some areas, a reliable service in electricity in Barbados. So the last blackout that we had last year, we got a small taste of what life would be like without reliable energy. And so that type of unstable supply has economic and social implications as well. We saw businesses being unable to cope with just simple, basic activities. We had to close schools. When you have no electricity, sir, in the 21st century, all major activities cease to stop. So this issue about grid design and making sure that there's stability in the grid when we add these new players is going to be vital and critical moving forward. Sir, adding new producers as well is also going to be, or rather it has to be matched with the type of energy we put onto the grid. The type of energy that we're putting onto the grid, solar and wind, are what we call intermittent. They fluctuate, basically. And that varies because of the time of day is, how strong the wind is blowing. It is all based on the natural environment that we do not control, unlike fossil fuel, that is a consistent supply once you have the oil. So what we have to ensure is not just, or manage the process by which how many players come onto the grid, but the type of energy mix that we will be instituting going forward. Sir, and having an energy mix that is both renewable and a mixture of fossil fuel is somewhat recommended by experts, because there's a level of redundancy and backup that the fossil fuel will allow you to have in the production of electricity and the generation of electricity. I will not stand here and say that having a 100% renewable run country is not a glorious ambition, but there is that fact of ensuring that there is some supply of energy at any given time that is consistent that we can have here in Barbados. Sir, what I am a bit concerned about is, because we're doing it in such a short space of time, this transition to renewable energy, is that we don't have a lot of things figured out. We're implementing while putting together management strategies, and that may cause a bit of conflict going forward. On page 45 of the Barbados National Energy Policy, which for me, I would have thought that would have been a guidance document, both in terms of management and technical aspects. And those in the industry that I've spoken to have said it is a little light on the technical details. A lot of information is not given as it relates to the technical aspects of how we make this transition. But nonetheless, on page 45 of that energy policy, the current energy policy is the lack of grid connection rules is a barrier to sustainability. Sir, we have to bear that in mind, because given we have a monopoly in that sector, the utility company Barbados Light and Power, we have to be cognizant that there is a certain level of leverage that the Barbados Light and Power has over the grid. because they own the grid and it's their investment. So what you have now is to manage that process of transition where both the existing utility still has an invested stake in the sector, that they will ensure that their investment in the grid is maintained, as well as making sure there is room for other players to make an investment and to see returns on investment. Sir, so those types of market dynamics that we will have going forward, we have to consider them. And I think that is where the FTC is going to have to play a major role. And I'm sure they're working behind the scenes in order to get a lot of these things finalized and accomplished. But sir, it has to all be in an effort to ensure that there's a stable environment, to ensure that consumers also still get the best deal possible. It cannot just be that investors are making a high rate of return, but consumers are also reaping the benefits from renewable energy. Sir, so the first consideration, as I said, was grid design. The second one is storage, energy storage. It is going to be another key component of this transition. Sir, the more we rely on renewables, the more we're going to have to build in storage at source, whether that's at the utility, the IPP, or the household level. And I just want to say to the Chamber and to all of Barbados that we've really missed the mark in capitalizing on renewable energy storage. One of our very own, Mr. Carlton Cummins, the owner of Acceleron, is a global leader in energy storage right now. And the fact that we have not been able to leverage his intellect for the betterment of all of Barbados in terms of instituting his capacity here in Barbados. Instituting his capacity here in Barbados, I think, is something that we've really missed the mark in capitalizing on. Countries all over the world have been calling and demanding his services, a Barbadian, as it relates to Carlton Cummins is his name, as it relates to energy storage, because we recognize that storage is going to be a vital component. Sir, the market value for stationary battery storage by 2030 will cross the threshold of US $120 billion. Even if 10% of that market Barbados was to leverage, Mr. President, we would have been in good stead. But somehow we do not embrace and cultivate our innovators, and we don't tap into the creativity that we have in a lot of our young people, and I don't believe that those types of opportunities should have been missed in terms of having the foresight to embrace somebody who was coming into the energy market and causing disruption and creating a product that the world, not Barbados, not the Caribbean, but the world is going to demand in the coming years. Sir, looking at that example of where the future is going, how the economic situation is unfolding, and our need to tap into new areas of innovation and business, if we are talking about creating new businesses, he would have been the prime example of how do we use research and development in energy, and how do we transition that to something that we can sell to the world, even if production does not happen in Barbados, but the intellectual copyright is based in Barbados. We would have still had dividends being paid if we utilized the local talent that we had here in Barbados. But nonetheless, sir, he is based in the UK. His company, I believe, is also based in the UK, and he's doing extremely well, and I wish him, and I'm sure all of Barbados wishes him well in his endeavors. He was actually named Forbes 30 under 30 entrepreneurs So it is not that we don't have that we have a lack of talent here in Barbados. It is that the ecosystem, in order for those entrepreneurs to thrive, just simply does not exist, or it breaks down somewhere along the line in terms of younger persons trying to innovate and establish businesses and not being able to take advantage of what is here in Barbados. So the third area, and the leader of government business also mentioned this, is transportation. As we move towards renewables, our transportation sector will have to be transformed as well. Government recently, just last week, imported 33 electric vehicles in terms of public transport buses. And it is a step in the right direction. There is the argument over, can we produce these buses here locally versus importing them? You would have to weigh the feasibility of utility cost benefits analysis. But again, if there is a concerted effort on innovation and how do you transform traditional combustible engines to electric batteries, powered vehicles, that is also an innovation that Barbados can utilize and capitalize on. Sir, if we are looking at the transport sector as well, it consumes a third of the energy that is produced, here in Barbados in terms of energy, fossil fuel consumption. So in order for government to reach that 2030 target, they have to also look at how do you transform the transport sector. Doing it with public vehicles is easy. The government has control over that. But when you're talking about private vehicles, that is going to be another conversation that the government will have to have with the people of Barbados. And I believe possibly that conversation should have started a bit earlier, because if we're talking about moving from the current vehicles we have to electric vehicles, let's say, for instance, Mr. President, at the moment we're still importing gasoline and diesel vehicles. You cannot tell a person who has just purchased a 2019 vehicle, in 3 years' time, you need to get rid of your vehicle. That will that will not go down well with a lot of Barbadians. So that, in and of itself, is going to be a change that the government will have to manage, and it will have to manage that very carefully, because internationally, under the Paris Declaration for Electromobility, 35% of our vehicles must be electric by 2030. 35% of the vehicles in Barbados under the Paris Declaration on Electromobility must be electric, Mr. President, by 2030. And you're giving me a look that is concerning me. Sir, putting that into terms, in terms of the amount of cars on the road, it means 2,000 electric vehicles would have to enter the country annually. I do not believe we have 500 electric vehicles in Barbados at the moment. Just about 500 electric vehicles. So if we are to reach this target of 35% of our vehicles being electric, and 2,000 of those vehicles coming into the country have to be electric, that means there's going to be a significant shake-up. Significant. Setting aside the comments regarding the used car industry that we've heard recently, this is another, and I use the word conversation, because I think that what has to happen is we also have to be rational. Although we've set targets, we still need to be rational, and we still need to be sensitive to people's property, what people have invested in, and how the country feels about a lot of these targets that we are talking about. The other side of that is transitioning, yes, to electric vehicles, but then we also have to figure out what to do with the old ones. It is okay to tell someone, you need to change your vehicle, I'm going to give you a tax incentive, bring in your old car and we'll give you an electric vehicle for whatever amount of money, etc. But then there needs to be a sustainable, disposable strategy on those old vehicles. Right now across Barbados, even now, when we're not having that type of conversion from from old combustible engines to electric, there are many places you can drive around Barbados now and see lots of old vehicles just standing idle and being an eyesore to many of us and causing health issues. So that strategy on how we dispose of the current vehicles that we have on the road is also going to be something that needs to be taken into account, as well as what does that mean for all those players as well in the used car market. How are we going to manage the process of bringing in electric vehicles? Are used car operators or owners of companies who bring in vehicles for persons, are they going to also be allowed to bring in electric vehicles to meet the demand that is going to occur in the near future? Sir, so transportation, that is going to be another clear area where we're going to have to put some things in place in terms of reaching this goal of being 100% renewable energy driven. Sir, there are going to also be economic implications. We've heard a lot about how COVID-19 has basically decimated the tourism industry with very little foreign exchange coming into the country. The renewable energy sector does provide an opportunity for new investments and new instruments, financial instruments that people can take advantage of. We just recently were told about the formation of the Sustainable Energy Cooperative Society. And sir, unlike other instruments that have been discussed, I will wholeheartedly put my support behind Barbadians if they can afford it at this time. Please, please invest in renewable energy instruments and become owners once again in the Barbadian energy sector. I think that is something that is doable, and through the cooperative society that has recently been announced, it is something that Barbadians can look to a secure investment in the future. Sir, because what we don't want is investors from abroad lining up and taking advantage of the opportunity that the renewable energy sector is going to play in Barbados, and the average Barbadian not sharing in those dividends.
How costly?
Sir, that is not, I don't have those details. But nonetheless, if you can afford it, I think it is a good investment. So I mentioned that we are looking at the energy sector as a way to drive investment, and that is needed. The Barbadian economy needs an injection of investment. We've heard in the other place mention of the permission to establish a waste-to-energy plant. And as that investment is being estimated to be $325 million. The plant is expected to produce 25 megawatts of energy. And globally, behind solar and wind, waste-to-energy investments have also been on the rise. just last year alone, in approval, you've had US $123 million in waste-to-energy plants being approved by governments across the globe. So it is an area where people are becoming more comfortable with. However, there are some things that need to be understood if that is the direction that we're going in. And it seems that we're going in that direction without consultation, because it has been tabled as being in discussion and soon to be. So by all accounts, I would assume that some kind of confirmation has been given to investors about this waste-to-energy plant. Sir, the announcement was made with very few details, and I like to ask questions. One of the details that was given was that 80% of the waste that would be needed, 80% of the waste that will be needed would be imported into Barbados. Mr. President, what I struggle with is, given the abundance of solar and wind potential, is it necessary for us to move in the direction of waste to energy and then not have the necessary input for a plant like that to import waste into Barbados? I'm not sure I understand the rationale. Even if the economics make sense, there are other energy sources that we can use. So why are we rushing to establish a waste-to-energy plant that 80% of the waste is being imported? I am only going, sir, with what I heard in the other place and the questions that I have. Mr. President, what was also not indicated to us is what type of waste. Because you can have organic waste and you can have inorganic waste. Is it inorganic waste that is municipal solid waste, which then has things like persistent organic pollutants, which is just a big word for chemicals that once they get into your natural environment, they do not dissipate. You then see these same chemicals come up in your water supply, your soil content, fish, animals, because once they get into the ecosystem, sir, they do not disappear. I'm sure if some of us were tested, some of these chemicals would actually be found in our systems. So, sir, I ask those questions in terms of what type of waste are we thinking of importing? Is it municipal solid waste that is inorganic, or is it organic waste in terms of biomass? And then, sir, it was also noted that we're using agricultural lands to produce the organic matter to feed the plant. Forgive me, Mr. President, but COVID-19 was a test run. That's how I see this pandemic. COVID-19 is a test run, and it is an example of how the climate crisis is going to change life on Earth. Because if we see how the disruption of supply chains were impacted by COVID-19, the coronavirus pandemic, the question becomes, what is more important? Taking up arable land to produce energy in a waste-to-energy plant, or actually using that arable land for food production? That is just the rationale that I'm trying to get to, and trying to also understand where government's policy is going. Sir, and even if you tell me that we're bringing in waste that is non-toxic, it won't affect person's health, etc., etc. The question also is a centralized biomass waste-to-energy plant the best way to set up a waste-to-energy plant in Barbados? Or is it that we use organic waste from our communities so that we also, in putting together this concept of waste-to-energy, get Barbadians to start to move towards a more recyclable approach to waste, what is called waste diversion? Are smaller communal plants a better option than the centralized plant in the event that you do not have the critical mass to run the plant? These are the type of questions that I have. And sir, as I wrap up with the health considerations. On the announcement, I was still not clear as to the type of technology that is to be used from the waste-to-energy plant. Is it through gasification? Is it through incineration? Because, sir, a number of studies have shown that burning even burning biomass produces emissions of nitrogen oxide, which causes pollution, carcinogens, and carbon monoxide, making the technology, if not handled properly, toxic and dangerous. And there are examples of these types of incidences occurring across the globe in terms of the negative impact if not managed properly. And do we have the technical capacity as well, Mr. President? And I know EPD does an excellent job. The Environmental Protection Department does an excellent job in monitoring a lot of our natural environment in terms of monitoring the chemicals that are in our waterways and so on. But also, do we have the technical capacity here to ensure that the emissions regulations and the waste and the byproduct that is produced from the waste-to-energy plant is above board and has the right standards in place to ensure the health of Barbadians who live in a close proximity of the plant? So, sir, for me, I want to say I do support the amendments. But I am a little concerned that government has found itself in a position where it is trying to manage a process and put together a strategy for a process while doing the process. And no fault to theirs, they only got in 2018. But there are some things that, if not taken into consideration, they will find themselves in a position where there is a lot of competing interests happening in the energy sector, and then also in a grasp to secure investment from abroad. We bring technology here that we have not fully articulated, one, to the people of Barbados, what are the implications in terms of the waste to energy, and two, are there other viable, cleaner alternatives that can be used, like, for instance, ocean wave energy, ocean thermal energy. Our economic zone, our EEZ, is 500 times the land. It's 500 times the land base of Barbados. There's more than enough ocean to go around. If we can also become a leader in ocean energy, that is another area that we can tap into. So I just want to say I support the amendments, but I stick a pin particularly in the type of energy mix that we are considering and how we manage the transition moving forward. And Mr. President, know that I'm hearing so many asides I want to thank you for your indulgence. And I hope that the questions that I have asked, I'm sure a lot of Barbadians will ask these questions as well, and possibly some answers from the other side once the debate on these two bills are over, particularly as it relates to that waste-to-energy plant proposition that the government has put on the table and put in the public domain. Mr. President, I am obliged to you, sir.
I next recognize Senator Adams.
Thank you, Mr. President. No, I only have a few truly brief remarks to make, and I know that's not the first time that's been said in here, but I really will try and keep these brief. Indeed, I remember one of our number standing up and saying, this will be the shortest contribution I've ever made. 40 minutes later, he's still redefining brevity, but I will try and keep it under that. You say I was kind, I didn't identify who that was, but I support both these amendments, and given the information that was displayed in the other place, I think it's worth echoing a couple of those. And I thought the previous speaker made some very interesting points, and I think I can give a couple of answers maybe, or a different perspective on one or two of them. But firstly, when in the other place this bill was presented, there were several items or categories that were identified, and indeed the Leader of Government Business here echoed some of them. So energy security we spoke about, and that manifests itself in two ways. There's some of us in here who are old enough to remember both oil crises, some who are perhaps Generation Z, that's just history to them. But that has a couple of effects. One, if businesses simply can't, as Senator Drakes described, count on a reliable energy source, that's a huge disruption. And two, just the simple price that we have to pay in terms of expressed as a percentage of GDP can be severe. In a bad year, in the not so distant past, we paid about 10% of GDP to import energy. That's in a bad year. So the numbers are pretty compelling when we decide that we have to seek alternative sources, and they should be balanced, as Senator Drakes described. And of course, they're the 2030 environmental goals that we're trying to meet. That's just common sense. We have to have a sustainable policy. But there's another aspect I would touch on, and again, in the other place, they spoke about it in terms of the potential of renewable energy, especially perhaps at the moment photovoltaic energy as an investment, attractive investment for individuals, companies, and even the government itself. And on the government level, there's a lot of coherence in this policy, because one of the things the government plans is the Asset Management Fund, or also known as a Sovereign Wealth Fund. This is a great opportunity for the government to lever renewable energy into that fund as a source of renewable revenue that can be used, reinvested in other aspects of our social development. Now, that kind of planning permits the very economic enfranchisement that we've spoken of here a little bit indirectly, but it's really a direct impact. It might be in terms of a credit union investing, it might be in terms of a public fund, or even a consortium of individuals. But in all these aspects, if it runs through a sovereign wealth fund, that can be accelerated. It can be a form of indirect ownership in that each taxpayer has a call, a claim on that fund, or it can be direct if that fund were to spin off a company that's specializing in photovoltaic or other forms of renewable energy, and allow individuals to take a direct stake in such an undertaking. Now, we know that these bills are establishing an important potential for those things to be achieved. They set out a regulatory framework that not only protects consumers, but also producers. And it's a collective way, particularly if you look at a section like Section 4 in the Fair Trading Commission bill, it is a collective form of discussion that sets the foundation for what can be a powerful industry for us. And as an aside, I noticed that Senator Drakes mentioned Carlton Cummings and Acceleron. I don't believe he's been overlooked. I think even in March 2019, the Prime Minister specifically named him in her speech to Parliament as somebody that the government intended to work with. So I don't think we've lost an opportunity, and had she not made that statement, I don't think the horse has bolted at all. You yourself pointed out that there's a lot to discuss and a lot to settle. So it's not the case that the government is missing opportunities or seeking to ignore important Barbadians who have a contribution to make. This is not Jofra Archer, and we did okay without him in the test match. So I think we're well set up here. I'm going to say that I was struck by one point in particular around the timing and complication that Senator Drake's identified. It is complicated. If we don't start, we won't finish. So we have to get started. We can't always know when you start a plan what are the circumstances that you'll face a year, 2 years, or 3 years down the road. We do have competing interests, or at least frictions, potential frictions, particularly the Barbados Light and Power, and I couldn't help thinking of them when you spoke about it, and of the fact that the NIS sold their shares under the previous administration. I think that has complicated the task, and they sold them at well below book value. I think if we had a voice in the governance of that company, it might make this task easier, but still not all is lost. But that was an example, in my view, of short-termism, selling these shares to provide operating revenue for the government. When you had a stake in a company that at one time was paying as much as 6% dividend and being held by a pension fund, this is almost a perfect investment, whatever was gotten rid of. Anyway, that is an aside. I said I would be quick, and I'm going to wrap up. On the economic franchisement part, this is really critical to me. I think that we are opening up an opportunity for savings equals investment in economics. We're opening up an opportunity here for savings that we know are in our banking system to flow into investments that do something that's fairly unique in finance. They satisfy an individual need, but also a collective need. We've got here an investment that meets several requirements that I've mentioned, energy security, our renewable goals, and so on. These are goals the government has stated, but at the same time, we're capable here of providing an investment instrument for individuals, much like the BOSS bonds, Barbados Optional Savings Scheme, that we voted through here. This is another path to provide economic enfranchisement for our citizens. Now, I note that with the BOSS, we had one opposition senator vote yes and one vote no, but I hope today they will recognize that this is an important step to developing an industry that can really provide ordinary Barbadians, ordinary Barbadian companies, and the Barbados government, which is all of us, with a great opportunity to build a new economic pillar in our economy. And that, sir, is my very brief contributions. I'm obliged.
Thank you. Senator Greenidge is our next speaker.
Mr. President, let me begin by saying that this morning I started to make some notes just to say a few words in this particular debate. And sir, I reached a stage where I had actually written down, commend Mr. James Husbands and commend Professor Headley. And sir, so when I reached that stage, I realized that I had spoken on this topic already. That is what made me realize. Because I recall very well having spoken about the contribution of Professor Headley, and a certain senator came to me afterwards and said, I was proud when you spoke of Professor Headley because he was my tutor and he was an excellent man. Senator Rogers, remember that? And it's when I reached that point that I honestly said, I have spoken on this topic already. So there I was on the highway speaking, and then I said, you may as well stop now and just take a side road. And even though, yes, it relates to the debate, I was somewhat pushed off the road because I didn't want to be saying the same thing that I have said before. But so when I look at these amendments today, I had to say that this particular initiative is really aimed at helping us to provide for Barbados the framework for an affordable, comprehensive, and national energy plan. And I can see, and I'm sure others as well, that every attempt, sir, is being made to make energy more affordable for ordinary Barbadians. Every recent step, Mr. President, that we have taken in this renewable energy sector is aimed at releasing that chokehold, that advantage, that exclusive right which a firm or a few firms enjoy because they supply and they have control over a particular product. We have reached the stage now, Mr. President, where we can no longer allow those monopolies to fix prices, to exclude potential competitors, to dominate and control the market. And so small Barbadians must also have a stake in the fortunes of this country. Senator Drakes mentioned her fears, for instance, of seeing investors for abroad lining up to take advantage of the opportunities here. And sir, you and I know that things like fronting will come into play, that some local might be fronting for the investor from abroad. So even though attempts are also being made to ensure that there is a local market share and that our people get involved, we have to watch for things such as this. I'm very pleased, I heard it in the other place on about 3 or 4 of the speakers, emphasizing the fact that there's a minimum of 30% of business that must go to locals. And sir, that is a tremendous effort on our part, and we hope that Barbadians accept that opportunity with open arms. So it is indeed a fact that more and more persons in Barbados have become aware of the pressing need to have some kind of control, to have some kind, control over the energy that they consume. At present, sir, energy, the price of energy is not cheap. And sir, there are I wouldn't say lots, but sir, there are definitely persons in Barbados who rely constantly and who rely heavily on certain medical equipment, for instance, which require electricity. Such persons, Mr. President, cannot tolerate long lapses or delays in their energy supply. I know a person, sir, who would be on the point of death, and that person has had to have a generator there just in case the electricity goes off. And their lives, his and others, depend on constant, reliable, and affordable electricity. To them, sir, the only thing more important than energy may be something like oxygen. And they cannot do without it can't do without that energy supply, sir, for any length of time. Sir, picture this. Picture this. Gentleman who used to be a chain smoker for most of his life. His lungs are now only operating on a quarter of the capacity, or a quarter of the two lungs, quarter of the capacity. I don't know what the medical term is, sir, whether it's calcification or whatever it is, whatever the fault is. But that is his fate. That is what is happening to him. But he needs something, Mr. President, something extra to help him to breathe. He has a respirator or some similar apparatus, but he is in obvious trouble when the electricity goes off. And the point I'm making, sir, is that it is very dangerous to become entirely dependent on one particular source of energy. Sir, there is nothing like a cheap and a clean supply of energy. And sir, before I go any further, let me, like Senator Drake, let me commend the Barbados government on the recent, yes, she did. she did.
Is there objection to that?
No objection. Yes, on their recently acquiring those 33 electric buses. And I am pleased to know, sir, that we have also set up certain charging stations that they can keep going. And there's a second limb to it too. It's going to be extremely helpful, advantageous to persons with disabilities because they have the ramps and so on. But I think it is a good acquisition by government. And sir, affordable energy, sir, is the main ingredient for many of the endeavors of life, affordable energy. Because, sir, it spurs production. It spurs production. It spurs manufacturing. It spurs whatever is made by machinery. It even spurs what goes on in your kitchen. Affordable energy is extremely important. And sir, only about 2 days ago, our Prime Minister made a most profound statement. Then she said words to the effect that it is about time that the world moves away from fossil fuels and practices which harm the environment, and that the money spent subsidizing these fossil fuels would be better spent in renewable energy. A most profound statement made by our Prime Minister. Sir, Barbadians have become very, very energy conscious. In recent times, sir, Barbadians with money to invest have been demonstrating a tremendous interest in renewable energy. As I said earlier, there's the emphasis on local participation to the extent, a minimum that is, of 30%. In other words, if the Barbadian entity wants to invest in 70 or 80 or 90 or 100%, you can do so. The minimum should be 30%. And I recall Senator Drake's also making the point that if we had to count, maybe we will get about 500 electric vehicles in Barbados. And I do believe that in a couple of years or so, that number will rise greatly.
Much beyond that.
Yeah, much beyond that. And sir, not only that, there are solar panels everywhere now in Barbados. Going up everywhere still. On the roof of the hospital, the roof of police stations, roof of business places, roof of many houses. If you had to fly over Barbados and look at the rooftops, it would appear as though more than a third of Barbados would be in solar panels, covered by solar panels. Sir, the initial installation for solar, that initial cost could be a bit expensive, but it is a way of providing cheap, very cheap energy once you have cleared that initial hurdle. Once you get over the installation, then you realize what a great benefit it is. And so it is obvious, sir, that as we go along, amending and improving from time to time for the benefit of the ordinary man, that we have to change the laws to suit the times. And so as a regulator, the FTC is given the necessary oversight for the proposals contained in these amendments. And the FTC, we all know, sir, will guide and carry out the intent of the amendment. Sir, you couldn't ask for a better arrangement. You couldn't ask for a better arrangement using the FTC as the regulator. That entity, sir, the Fair Trading Commission, as I said, sir, will be responsible for judging the quality, judging the condition, judging the feasibility of projects, of watching and guarding the direction in which certain investors may want to take renewable energy in Barbados, in making sure, sir, that certain objectives and ideas are capable of being achieved. And sir, if you look at, there's a long list of functions in Section 4 of the Act, Cap 326, showing the actual functions and limitations and so on of the FTC. Because as we know, sir, the FTC, as the name suggests, sir, is about openness. It is about being unbiased. Fairness has always been the virtue that the FTC holds highest. As we know, sir, it is devoted to creating a competitive but a fair Barbadian society. And as I said, sir, there could be no better custodian, there could be no better regulator, there could be no better watchdog for this renewable energy sector than the FTC. But sir, that is very stark. Because sir, as I said, that is when I was on the highway and I diverted, sir, into a side road. And the side road is this, that I want, sir, to commend the Fair Trading Commission for enlightening Barbadians who did not know that there are certain consumer rights which were theirs, that they did not know that consumers were very important. Barbadians who did not know that their rights would be upheld and that the FTC would ensure that their rights are upheld. The Fair Trading Commission, Mr. President, has regard for the quality of products being offered to our consumers. They keep an eye, sir, on product standards, and they try to minimize risk of injury from some of these same products. As I said, it has focused its attention on protecting the interests and the rights of consumers. Sir, consumers know now that there is a remedial arm of government which will put wrong things right whenever they are being unfair. Consumers are now aware, Mr. President, that they can have recourse to an FTC which cares about them. Sometimes, sir, just the mention of those three letters, FTC, that alone is sufficient to make a merchant back off once he hears you're going to the FTC for it. Of course, its major concern is to track the price level of goods and services being offered to the average Barbadian consumer. The FTC, Mr. President, is concerned with the fact that one person should not enrich himself at the expense of another. It tries to show fairness to all the parties, the merchants and the consumers. So we should not think, Mr. President, that the FTC is anti-merchant or it's anti-business or anti-wholesaler or anything of the sort. It tries to be fair. But you have to admit, sir, that there are merchants in Barbados who still believe that there are more foolish buyers in Barbados than foolish sellers, and that they can literally joke out the eyes of the average Barbadian consumer. And as far as they are concerned, that Barbadians consumers do not know that they have rights. I say, sir, that that might have been in the past or with the older folk. I know some people used to buy faulty items and then they were denied refunds when they took them back, sometimes taking them back with glaring defects, glaring faults. People bought defective articles, brand new, but which were not working properly. With sometimes not working at all. With the excuse coming from the agent that there's no manufacturer's warranty and that they could not replace the article. So what happened? Young lady bought a bag, she put it over her shoulder, and in tutus, the strap, Beijing would say the strap popped. The strap broke. And you took it back, nothing happened. I have had experience. My aunt bought a pair of shoes, she got one wearing from those shoes. And sole came away. And, you know, I was a shoemaker. A few tacks and a little glue. A few tacks and a few glue. And I put it right. I put it right, sir. But, sir, that couldn't happen nowadays. That couldn't happen nowadays, sir. Nowadays it would be, I want back my money, or I know where to go. A friend of mine, a lady, bought a new car. I'm not going to say the make or anything like that, but I didn't buy it for her. No, it was a brand new car, brand new. And in 2 days, within 48 hours, you get and something is wrong with the car. And she took it back. And the supervisor, whoever he was, the boss, looked at it and said another of these things. And told the lady a very small wire needs soldering. And he says, okay, I'll solder it for you. And she says, solder? You telling me a car I bought less than 2 days ago and you're going to solder something for me? I want a new car. And she got a new car. But I do believe that it was soldered and it was sold as brand new to whoever came and got it. Maybe it's still working well because all it wanted was that. But she refused to take it. And in a flash, they gave her a new one. And mind you, I always believe, and I'm sure that you do too, sir, believe that it is easier and it is cheaper for the merchant or the store owner to recover his money from his suppliers because he buys in bulk and recourse to the suppliers. That is a norm and it is accepted without question. But the consumer here sometimes would have problems. Mr. President, I do believe that you would have traveled far and wide, and that also, Mr. President, that you would have shopped from time to time at some very high-end stores. Sir, let me admit up front that when I go overseas and I'm shopping, I shop at Walmart, I shop at Sears, I shop at JCPenney. I don't go no higher than them. No, I ain't going no higher than those. But sir, what I am saying, sir, is this. The point I'm making is this. Sir, this is the point. That the customer service desk is the busiest part of those stores that I have just mentioned. You see that customer service desk? Always packed with people. And the people in those stores seem to have a lot of respect for the consumer. People return purchases for all types of reasons. A part missing, a button come off, the color isn't the exact color you thought it was, the size isn't thing, the size isn't correct. Yeah. And you know why they take them back? You know why that customer service desk is so busy? Because places like the United States, Mr. President, have some very strict consumer protection laws to which those stores must adhere. They're very, very strict with them. In this country, sir, many persons have fallen victim to the no exchange, no refund, no return policies of some of the stores here. Consumers, sir, saw those signs put up in stores, and consumers took it for granted that the signs had the power and the force of law, and that all Bajans could say when they saw that sign was money dead, that's it. Maybe, sir, years ago. Today, consumers know that those signs will not stand up before the FTC. Of course, the key to all this is that you have to maintain and keep some proof of purchase. Keep your receipts as proof of purchase. Don't throw your receipts away. And sir, with technology and so on abounding in Barbados, a lot of young people now take a snapshot of their receipt on their phone so that they can produce that receipt if necessary. So that hurdle of producing evidence to prove that you bought the article from that particular store is not as steep as it used to be. Thanks to the FTC, sir. And sir, there will always be consumers who need assistance and advice as to what to do. And thankfully, sir, our Fair Trading Commission very often directs them as to what they should do. And thankfully, the FTC sends a strong message that consumers have a right to get what they pay for. Mr. President, with those words, sir, I strongly support the Fair Trading Commission Amendment Bill and the Utilities Regulation Amendment Bill 2020. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Senator Haynes.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. I won't be long looking at the hour. I know everybody is eagerly awaiting lunch. I can appreciate that this issue will not be divisive because we can all agree on two simple facts about fossil fuels. Historically, they've been dirty and expensive. And I remember traveling to Europe a few years back, and particularly in a stop in Germany, looking all over the place, every rooftop on public buildings, on homes, solar panels everywhere. And I remember returning home because that time we had traveled in fall. It was pretty cold, and I was thinking, here it is, a country that's covered in snow for probably 5 months of the year, has all of these solar panels, and back home where we come from a region where geographically, when you consider what we've been blessed with, we're located in a nice tropical climate, a land with a perpetual summer, more or less. So we have abundant, free solar resources. We're located in the middle of an ocean. So we have abundant access to hydro resources in terms of the potential for electricity generation. We're located near to tectonic plates where we can access what they call geothermal energy from volcanic activity, whether terranean or subterranean volcanoes. And we have abundant wind resources. Everybody's familiar with the Northeast trades, and you just need to take a drive down to East Coast, and if you're not careful, you will lose your hat. And it really made me wonder why in all of the years has the region failed to really tap in and exploit what comes freely, naturally, and abundantly. I took a look at the global figures for the leaders in terms of renewable energy production. And in the top 10, every single country is a European nation. On the flip side, we have a situation where the Caribbean region enjoys one of the highest annual solar resources in terms of the potential for exploitation. Our capacity to generate energy from solar exceeds what would be the leading global markets. So I kind of wonder, why have we failed to tap in? And I found a survey of 30 utility companies in the region. And they were trying to outline what some of their challenges have been historically in terms of failing to really exploit what comes free, what comes abundantly, and what comes naturally. And some of the barriers that they had identified were political and economic. Some were legislative, and some were related to regulations. And that is exactly why we find ourselves here today, because we're part of an administration where our leader has committed to a very, very lofty goal of the country being fossil fuel free by 2023. And when I look at the fact that in CARICOM, right now 87% of CARICOM's fuel energy source is actually fossil fuel, and in Barbados, less than 10% of our energy comes from renewable resources, I'm thinking, okay, so we have 9.5 years to achieve another probably 93% growth in a sector that has been languishing and has been underexploited. But I had an art teacher at Harrison College, and what she told me years and years ago, and I always took this with me, she said, if you aim for the sky, you might still reach a treetop. So it's still important to set lofty and ambitious goals, because you might actually surpass what you might have otherwise planned to accomplish. When we look at Barbados's history in terms of accessing or exploiting renewable energy sources, reference has already been made to the fact that we had been pioneers really in the solar water heating industry. So from the 1970s to now, there have been roughly about 50,000 solar water heaters installed on buildings and homes across the country. And that has actually had a significant impact. It has reduced our annual carbon emissions by about 5.5%, and has also reduced our fossil fuel consumption by roughly, the figure I have here is 200 kilowatt hours per year. So we saw the early strides made, but then you have to wonder why there was a failure, in a sense, to continue to build on that. More recently, obviously, we would see the younger pioneers start to emerge. Senator Drakes would have made reference to young Carlton Cummins of Inogen Technologies. We have Jo Edgell of Mega Power and her push to really get the electric vehicle movement going. And gradually, you've seen more and more of an uptake of EVs in particular, where Barbados ranks among the highest per capita penetration of electric vehicles globally. So there is a clear desire and commitment to the industry, but we have to do more. And there is a willingness to do more, thankfully. One of the other things I wanted to touch on is the fact that fossil fuels have subjected countries like ours to a level of volatility in terms of pricing that has caused significant economic impact in some cases. Senator Adams made reference to the fact that at its highest, in terms of the cost per barrel of oil, I believe that was in 2014, we had spent roughly $900 million in fuel imports. I think for the last year, 2019, we had spent around $728 million. So if we can really work on building out our natural resources in terms of energy production, we'll have an opportunity to significantly offset our fuel import bill, and we'll also be able to attract a greater level of foreign direct investment, and the investment will also lead to greater job creation. So here it is, we are looking at a time when there are calls from every corner to diversify the economy. We're realizing that the leave sector is taking a beating because of the COVID-19 pandemic. In an era where there's several calls to focus on diversification, here we are actively putting measures in place to offset some of the hindrances that utility providers have already indicated have restricted them and become a roadblock from really exploiting the full potential of the renewable energy that we have freely available to us. Now, importantly, as well as it must be mentioned that the environmental impact of fossil fuels is another issue. So we all know that traditionally industrialized nations overwhelmingly would have contributed to the climate crisis that we're now facing. Yet, we as small island developing states find ourselves on the front line of that climate crisis that in large part we have not created. I believe it was the Premier of Nevis who made the statement that we are cashing a check that we did not write. So in a sense, here we are committing ourselves, even as small states, to putting our action behind what we are asking our larger neighbors to also do. Because in many cases, you would feel like a number of backward steps were taken where larger nations have withdrawn from like the Paris Climate Agreement and so on. So unfortunately, we find ourselves in a position where we're not finding the commitment from some of the countries that might have contributed in a significant way to the climate crisis. But small nations can also take the lead, and I think it's important that we really put our money and our action where our mouth is and become leaders in the field. Now, I just want to close by saying that we can really see an effort to create the framework whereby people who have been interested and perhaps were not able to commit at the time because of the lack of the regulatory framework and because of the lack of legislation, they can now try to enter the market and create a space where locals and foreign investors perhaps can partner together. Hopefully we can see decisions being made in a way that are favorable from that standpoint, but also where the science is safe and sound. And I agree with Senator Drake's point with the fact that we have to ensure that for any new technology being considered, when we look at the energy mix, we need to ensure that it won't be to our detriment. And with those few words, Mr. President, I'm obliged.
Senator Moore, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, today I am in support of the amendments which are before us. I consider the amendments and a number of the initiatives which we have heard reported to us as important steps in achieving energy democracy. It is within that context that I am supportive of the bills, the amendments before us, because I recognize them as an attempt to address the policy and financial risk associated with such investments in Barbados by giving the FTC, which is a reputable entity, providing them with the opportunity to be a regulator as the sector opens up to more independent players. The amendments can therefore, or the debate before us can therefore be considered as another step towards advancing the vision of shaping energy democracy, or at least broadening participation in ways that can achieve energy transition, promote social justice, and enhance the possibilities of our people, ordinary people, to make determinations that are in their own interest. And it's within that context that I would want to spend a few minutes looking at a few points, just about 3 points. My contribution is not about solar owners or solar for that matter, but it is about the policy design and coherence and how we might be able to move towards a more equitable allocation of costs, how we may be able to move towards ensuring the ordinary man is able to take advantage of what we are discussing here. And so I would want us to spend a little time focusing on the vulnerability context. We might be doing the right things, and I believe that we are. I believe that the ambition of Barbados becoming 100% renewable by 2030 is a useful one. But I would want to suggest that we need to address the context that forces our people to feel that opportunities such as these may not relate to them, because opportunities such as these may be seen as offering potential to people who can afford them. And some of us might say, but that is not true because we are doing X or Y or Z to ensure just that ordinary people can access. But if people lack access to the information that could point them in the direction that we are planning for them, then the implementation is likely to fail. And I say that having recently come out of discussions surrounding the boss for public sector workers. Because individuals lack access to information concerning bonds and investment opportunities generally, what could potentially be a good thing for them was interpreted by too many, in my view, as something that was set up to trick them up or to take advantage of them in circumstances where, above whatever the underlying objective was, efforts had been taken and measured very carefully to ensure that it was, and it is, to the workers' benefit. So when I speak about the vulnerability context and access to information, yes, information is out there. But for a person whose capacity to access that information is limited, I think that we have to do more to make sure that individuals understand a lot more about renewable energy, about investing in renewable energy, how it relates to them, how it relates to their families, how it makes a difference to them being able to put food on the table. All of these are conversations that need to be broken down. So I want to move out of within the vulnerability context, spend a little time focusing on the need for better education. And I think immediately of our school system and the need for our school system and our curriculum to be, the curricula really, to be better geared towards just that, educating from small. If you go and you start speaking bonds and renewable energy to the average person over 65, 60, that discussion will go past them fast. But if you take that discussion to a school child, the youngest child, they are able to present things and represent them and rehash them in a way that gets those grandparents all into the discussions that you are having with them. School children, and happen to know that children are an important way of calling parents and grandparents' attention to things that are important and also to the things that are not so important. So I think that whilst the discussions here today may be geared towards economic decision makers within companies and householders and so on, that we need to do better to identify the potential advocates for change, even as it relates to renewable energy at the community and the family level, the child. So we need to be doing a lot more. We will argue that we have taken steps, but I would want to suggest that we are not doing enough, or we have not been doing enough to be promoting pro-environmental habits within the school system. Nudging of parents, therefore, I'm recommending as an important social policy instrument in this regard. Senator Drates, in her contribution, spoke about the pace with which we would have to be moving to achieve 100% renewable energy by 2030. And for different reasons, I have concern with that pace too. Because once we are moving speedily towards objectives such as this, one of the considerations that come to my mind immediately is the need for sufficient skills availability in order to achieve the objectives we have set. Education, again, bolstering the skills availability through training and education is very important. And I must admit that I have not taken the time to go into the community colleges, curricula, the TVET, and so on. I have not taken that time to investigate. But from where I sit, a lot of that information comes to me even where I don't take the time to access it. And there is not enough that we are seeing in that direction, and there's not enough that it is our view that's targeting our people to train them specifically for the future and the jobs of the future that would be associated with us having to pick up pace in implementing a renewable energy policy. Whilst the issue of skills shortage, Mr. President, is not unique to renewable energy, and while skills shortages is something that we are seeing in far too many areas in Barbados, I think that because we have set for ourselves such an ambitious greening objective for the next decade, that it is important for us to focus a little bit more fulsomely in this regard. And we have to, as we consider training for renewable energy, to ensure that our training initiatives are flexible enough, not only to focus on the retraining of the labor force for now, but to anticipate the peaks and troughs that are associated with working in a renewable energy environment. Of course, when there's pace, project development and so on will take place at a very rapid pace, but then there will be a lull there. As you go down the value chain, there's need to ensure that for maintenance purposes and installation purposes that our people are keeping pace with the relevant technologies that will be required and so on. So I know that we have a jobs creation commission, and I imagine that that commission will be giving attention to this and similar issues. But I just figured that within the context of this debate and where we're heading, it is important enough to emphasize, just per chance that the cross-cutting nature of issues such as this are not being fully reflected in the recommendations that are coming from that and other areas that more attention be given to this. So planning for renewable energy skills. If we have to proceed with pace, it may mean, and we were hearing that as well in the other house when the amendments were presented to the lower house. We were hearing that because for the last 7 years, little had been done to advance the renewable energy policy in Barbados. If you are to achieve by 2030 100% renewable energy, that it would require a very rapid implementation over the next 10 years. Against this backdrop, practical thinking would suggest that we therefore cannot spend more time where there are skills gaps, waiting until we have the requisite skills levels to address all areas of the transition towards 100% renewable energy. And that would not be my suggestion either, for us to wait. But an important consideration must be that where it is necessary to contract in skilled workers from outside of the country, that it should also be possible to project for when the country will or can have a lesser reliance on international expertise. In other words, we would want to see a situation where skills brought in are brought in for a finite period to transfer knowledge, and that skills can then go back out. And this is something that seems simple enough and may gain ready acceptance theoretically, but we've seen in far too many areas where this is not the way we operate in Barbados. And as we embark on, in the next decade, towards 100% renewable energy, I would like to see that what I'm talking about will manifest itself differently in this area than it has, for instance, in hotels. We have grown hearing tourism is our business. Let's play our part. And there are so many people in the tourism industry that would want to play a greater part at a higher level. But in 2020, even as we were hearing or experiencing shutdowns just about 3 months ago in the sector, 3-4 months ago in the sector, we were hearing a body of workers at one of our West Coast hotels complaining over the fact that financial controller was brought in at the hotel and expat. And that's not a tourism-specific skill, but what I mean, that is typical of what we experience in far too many areas of the tourism sector, where skills are brought in at the chef level, at different levels. And we have a very functional Palm Marine here and other areas that turn out students, but then our students and then our workers find themselves contained only at the very lowest levels within the job structure in these areas. I would like to think, and I think Barbadians would like to see the time come when such occurrences are things of the past. And I think it necessary, therefore, within the context of this debate, not saying only for renewable energy, but generally that we would like to see a change in this regard. And of course, to have training effected in a way that will make sense to us, we have to boost the supply of trainers. And I support, therefore, previous speakers who spoke of the need of drawing down from the expertise of those Bajans and others who can work through our training institutions to provide training that will make our ordinary citizens see that they can access opportunities in renewable energy because they have the skill sets. They're trained with the skill sets that can function in the area. And then the final area that I would want to mention relates to just transition. And just transition is a term that has been used mainly by trade unionists around the world. It is also used in the just transition, JUST. It's also used a lot in the UN system. And basically what it is, or what is expected to address, is moving from one thing to the next and ensuring that in transitioning or moving from one set of jobs to another set of jobs, or from focus on one sector to another sector, that it is done in a way that it does not find workers being automatically displaced as they now don't have jobs in the particular area. And I guess it might relate to, it does relate to what I said earlier about boosting the skills capacity. But as we move into renewable energies and reduce reliance on fossil fuels, it will have implications for workers that work with fossil fuels right now in those areas. As we move more towards batteries and so on, you will find jobs being created in some areas, and like anything else, you lose some. The importance of just transitioning is ensuring that workers who are likely to be displaced have sufficient opportunities to be upskilled and retooled for the jobs that will be generated in a renewable energy environment. I know that we have done well, the government has done well in terms of the discussions with our energy providers, our current energy providers, to ensure that they are on notice. But I think that if we are going towards clean energy and looking at how clean energy can help to boost not only residents but small businesses and help allow them to thrive and maybe gain other potential sources or take advantage of other potential sources of income, that a lot more has to be done to engage and make sure that it's not just out there but targeted training to businesses who will find themselves in the or on the other side of the transition that is being made at a very rapid pace. As it relates to COVID-19 and handling the COVID-19 aftermath, I think it's important for us to start speaking as we move aggressively and actively towards 100% renewable by 2030, to show displaced workers, for instance, and there are plenty of them, and NIS claims will bear me out, show displaced workers how they may have a future. There are many jobs associated with occupations associated with renewable energy, many subsectors in the value chain, from engineers, technicians, scientists, sales personnel, so not only the technical people, but you're coming down the value chain, sales personnel, public relations people, mediators, attorneys, things that you won't really think about, because even as we move towards these investment opportunities, it's important not only to have the engineering expertise intact, but to have attorneys that can help leverage the negotiations and so on, machinists, electricians, plumbers, as we incorporate it into hybrid arrangements with agriculture and so on, agricultural sciences, plant breeders, and so on, and the list goes on. So when we think about jobs in renewable energy, there may be the tendency only to think about very technical areas. But the discussions have to be broad-based and widespread amongst people who are looking for opportunities, people who are desperate for opportunities, and active efforts being taken towards preparing them for the jobs throughout a renewable energy value chain. So as the transition to renewable energy gathers pace, enhancing the quality of employment and making people understand that there are enhanced opportunities is going to be very critical for our policymakers. And when I say our policymakers, I'm not referring strictly to government, because in Barbados, we like to pride ourselves as having a functional social partnership. And so the discussions around this must be brought fully within that context to ensure that everybody is on the same page. So, Mr. President, I support the amendments. Before I conclude my contribution on the issue of jobs, it would be remiss of me not to highlight that the jobs in fossil fuel related areas now are largely what we would consider formal jobs. And there may be the concern by workers or people as they hear about opportunities that will come on stream, that these opportunities will largely not only be technical, because I've addressed that, but will be largely informal type jobs where entrepreneurs may be the target or contract people will be the target. So it is going to be critical in our presentation of these and other jobs for the future that we are presenting jobs that are formal in nature, that will allow people not only a good wage, a solid wage at the end of a week or at the end of a month, but also afford them the social security benefits and social protection that is associated with formal types of work as well. So I support the amendments and the initiatives that are being made. And if you take nothing else, or if this chamber takes nothing else from the contribution that I've made this morning, it is the emphasis that has been made on the need for policy coherence to ensure that the people who are ordinary citizens of our country don't only benefit from prices, but see themselves at the center and as an important factor in pursuing Barbados's energy and climate policy. Policy coherence, therefore, must ensure that people on low incomes see themselves as a high priority in the action to improve overall energy efficiency in Barbados. Mr. President, I thank you.
Thank you, too.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this sitting be now suspended for 1 hour.
Question is that this sitting be now suspended for 1 hour so that we can get some lunch, returning at 2:45. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it, and we are now at lunch.